Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are thrilled to bring back one of our alumni, Annette Favorite. Annette is the Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer of West Pharmaceutical Services, Inc. West Pharmaceutical Services, Inc. is a leading manufacturer of packaging components and delivery systems for injectable drugs and healthcare providers. Annette, thank you very much for coming back here. We're really quite thrilled to have one of our leading alum back on campus. So thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to be back here. It's been so long.
Well, we hope that you'll be coming back much more frequently now. So.
I think I might.
Can you say a little bit, so for years, HR was kind of talking about can we have a seat at the table and that sort of thing, but it's clear now HR is helping drive business success. Can you say a little bit about where you think HR might make the biggest difference in the next few years?
I have to say, for me, being a CHRO at West Pharmaceutical Services, the biggest areas where I have an impact is in strategic workforce planning, leadership development, and now focusing on the employee experience. You'll recall many, many years ago, you always heard the old adage, hire the right people at the right time, at the right place. That's still true. And companies nowadays, because of the influx of AI in the workplace, automation, need to be able to predict the skills that they're going to need and when they're going to need it. And HR can play an incredibly good, be a good business partner as they help the business define what that strategy will be. Do you buy, do you build, or do you borrow? And there's incredible programs that need to be established from an HR perspective in terms of how do you hire and attract the skills, what partnerships do you do to ensure that you can get the skills in the market, especially given the low unemployment rate and the scarcity of skills, and then how do you develop the people? So that's one area. The other area I would say is in leadership development. With regards to leadership development, our leaders are really the influencers of the company. They're the culture carriers. They're the ones that help motivate and retain our employees. So we need to make sure, from an HR perspective, that we are giving them the tools that they need to be able to be that culture carrier in the business. Make sure that they're sharing with our employees what is the purpose, what's our strategy, how can they contribute to the strategy, and making sure that our employees are engaged. The third area is on employee experience, and that's a new one for me, to be honest with you, because in the past it was always HR looking inside out. Now we need to flip that around and look outside in, understand what that employee is experiencing, have those listening programs that help you understand what helps them to want to stay at a company. How, what retains them? What's that value proposition you need to deliver from an employer perspective so that you can retain that talent? So I would argue those are the three main areas that are key for HR professionals in the future.
So you covered a couple of things that are really interesting to me, and one of them is you mentioned strategy a few times, and that's not something that a lot of people think of as critical to the HR, or even that would be an HR responsibility. So can you say a little bit more about how you're helping the company think about strategy, and then how you're helping everyone within the company stay in line with that strategy when you think about getting the right people in the right place?
Well, in terms of defining that strategy, it always starts with, in my case, the enterprise strategy plan. So what is the vision of the business? Where does the C-suite and the CEO wish to have the business go in the future? How are we going to continue to grow? So HR really has to understand what is that business strategy. Once you understand what's happening from a business perspective, then the HR leaders in the business partners, the CHRO, have to get in at the table with the business leaders to define, how do I get you from point A to point B? I mean, you always hear resources are the biggest investment of a company, and it's true. You can have the best products, you can have the machinery that's needed, but if you don't have the people that are driving that strategy, you're not going to get anywhere. So sitting down and understanding where the business wants to go and helping them understand how can they leverage and get the best out of their human resources, the biggest investment that they make. How do you get the best out of them so that they can contribute to that strategy? And then, as I said earlier, it's the leaders that have to be able to communicate what that strategy is so every employee understands how do they fit in to that strategy. How do they fit into the purpose of that company? How can they contribute?
So in your current company and in your long, very successful career at IBM, you've worked with a lot of engineers and a lot of scientists. And so how do you go about getting them to understand exactly how they fit into the company? Is that a challenge in some way, or do they understand exactly how people fit with the strategy the same ways, or do they appreciate the HR role in all of this?
Do they appreciate the HR role? I'm not so sure if they really appreciate it. I think, though, that the way we make sure that the teams understand what that strategy is defining and continually communicating what are those strategic imperatives, and communicating in such a way that you outline what it is in terms of very simple, plain English, and you communicate the work that they're doing, how it links to that overall strategic imperative. Do they understand where HR is? At the higher level, I would argue that the business understands, because we're the ones that are sitting down at the table with the business leader, helping them understand how do you resource for those projects. What are some of the things that they need to consider? If you want to open up a technology center in India, what are the things you have to consider when you open up a technology center in India? You can't just go there and open it up. It's really trying to help them think through the process of here's where you are today, where do you want to get tomorrow, and how can HR help you get to that position? If you're going to, another example, if you're going to automate some manufacturing lines, as an example, what does that mean to the people? How do you get the skills? Should you retrain? What are the relationships you can have at tech colleges, for example, to help the business get to the skills that they needed to run those lines? And how do you communicate?
And another area that you talked about as being really important was developing leadership in the company. And that's also one that I think people don't necessarily think of as HR role. I'm not sure what people think it is, or maybe I think a lot of people think it comes naturally, or MBA programs just kind of make it, you're born as a leader or something like that. So what are some of the things HR can do to help develop leadership throughout the whole organization?
Well, one of the ways we help is helping to identify who are the high potentials, understanding what are the skills needed for the business, and taking that skills, those competencies, those behaviors that you're looking at in order to execute the business strategy, and assessing the high potentials or the employees in the business, right? And then once you do that, it's once you've identified the people, how do you give them the experiences that they need in order to succeed? So as an example, succession planning, and one of the most common things that CHROs do is succession planning. So identification of the critical jobs. They may not be executive positions, they just may be a very critical job in the business that you have to have. And trying to figure out what is that pipeline and what are the pipeline roles that will help to build the bench for those critical jobs, and making sure that you're working with the line to give the individuals that you believe can achieve those positions the stretch assignments, the rotational assignments, the experiences that they need to position themselves to be a candidate for a given position. Obviously, succession planning at the C-suite level is critical. That can be very disruptive to a business if you don't have good succession planning. And ensuring that when you're doing leadership development, there's parity in terms of gender and ethnicity. And you also have a diverse cultural team that could potentially be on that leadership team. You got to have that diversity of thought, sorry.
So on that part about diversity, so you obviously are extremely successful. You're on the executive leadership team. What should we be doing as a society? What can we be doing to make sure we're getting more women up to that C-suite and onto boards?
Yeah, it's a challenge, to be very honest with you. Especially in my business, which is a manufacturing business, it's very male-dominated, and it is a challenge. I believe to help women get into the C-suite, it is starting early, helping young girls get a foundation of STEM, the science, the math, the engineering, to help them be able to do the critical thinking that's needed in a business. I believe it's also important for women to have opportunities in P&L, having a P&L experience, because if you think about what are some of the feeder groups into a CEO position, it's that P&L experience. And I think a business needs to make sure that they have programs that allow for that work-life integration that's needed. And that work-life integration applies to everyone, both, all genders, but it's for women specifically. They need to be able to safely leave the business if needed and be able to come back. You have to have the mentorship and the sponsorship. And from an HR perspective, one of the roles that I think an HR leader can do is to dispel the biases that continue to exist. I can recall a period of time in one of my jobs where I'm in a executive discussion, and there were two positions. These positions had two good solid candidates that could do either one of them. And one of the leaders in the discussion said, well, this candidate who's a female, she's got a family. She may not want to relocate. And as an HR leader sitting in that meeting, it was incumbent upon me, doing my job, to make sure that I spoke up. And I remember very clearly saying, that gentleman has a family as well. How do you know if he can relocate? Very respectful, but making a point. And HR leaders, regardless of the position that you are in the company, high, low, you have to be able to uphold gender parity.
So that story you told is sadly so frequent and common, except I think often there wasn't someone in the room to ask that second question. But on that one, the relocation issue, is that still really critical? Because we do know that in general, on average, women are less inclined to relocate than males are. Right. And then that, if relocation, so I guess really what I'm asking is the amount of relocation as important as it used to be, or has that become a bit of a loyalty test at times, or a weeding out in some way? So is it a critical skill?
I would argue it is. Okay. I've had global roles, and I never understood what it meant to be a global leader until I lived abroad. You can say, yes, I have a global team, but until you're in the country experiencing the culture, experiencing the behaviors, the norms, you don't know what it's like.
And living there is critical. You're not getting the same thing just staying at the local Ritz.
No, it's not. You have to live there and experience it. And so I would argue that if you want to get into the C-suite, if you want to go up in your career, having that international experience is very important. Very important.
And you also talked about the critical role that CHROs play in C-suite succession and CEO succession in particular. And you joined your company right now just very soon after the new CEO.
Yes.
Right? So can you say a little bit about what the CHRO can do to help that CEO transition into the position?
Well, I would argue that my CEO and we transitioned together. He was hired in April of 2015, and I joined in October of 2015. And when I joined, there was no CHRO. It had been vacated. And we were actually coming together to try and transform the company. And we did. We focused on organizationally changing the company from a product-led oriented company to a market-led oriented company. And we did that in the time frame of October until February when we announced a new structure. We also were very decentralized, and we centralized everything. And while we would argue we became a globally integrated company, that takes time. You can create the structure, but until you create the management systems and the norms associated with that and the decision rights, you don't really become a globally integrated company. But in terms of if the CEO were to leave and I was still here, how can I help him or her? It really, in my opinion, would be about helping that new CEO understand the landscape, understand the leadership team. I would tell you one lesson I learned early on in my career, that for me to be effective and support my customer, that CEO or that general manager, I had to know that team inside and out. Also helping the CEO develop key relationships with stakeholders, certain stakeholders, right? Helping them with understanding the board. Since I've got, since hopefully, I have that experience, but understanding the board and who plays what and, the interaction there. A CEO coming into a company, you got to believe that he or she has the hard skills. It's really the soft skills. And then the last thing I would say is helping to provide feedback to that CEO of how he or she is being perceived.
One of the things you talked about there was helping that CEO really understand the executive leadership team. Can you say a little bit about, one, is the executive leadership team actually a team? So a lot of people would argue it's just high-performing individuals. Yeah. And then if it is a team, what we can do to, maybe what the CHRO can do to really help develop, or the CEO and the CHRO, to really help develop that team?
Yeah. It's interesting, Anthony, you say that we're individual, high-performing individuals, and that's true. I truly believe that once you get into the C-suite, you had to be good to get there. You have to have that domain expertise. But what makes a group of individuals really effective is them coming together, being aligned to the mission of the company, being aligned to the strategy, having mutual respect and trust in one another, being able to collaborate well. Those are critical attributes that an effective leadership team need to have. And then the other thing I would say to you is that they need to be able to assess themselves on a regular basis. One of the things that we do at West is to come together and we have certain strategic priorities, and we all align to those priorities and define where we're going to contribute in those priorities based on our function. And we periodically have a review of those priorities to make sure that we're all aligned, that each of us know what the other is doing. And we make sure that we present a united front, and we communicate and communicate and communicate.
So is there kind of a minimum amount of time that you need to spend together doing this as an executive leadership team to be that team and develop that trust?
I wouldn't say there's a minimum amount of time. I think it's constant. You're always working on it. Always working on it. And there's one other thing that I failed to mention, and that is that you have to expose yourself. You have to, in a certain way, be vulnerable and be able to open up and get the feedback from someone else. If something's not working right, you have to have that trust and respect to have that conversation with the other person and be open to receive the feedback.
Is there anything that can be done to help people be better prepared to be CHROs, given those were the two big surprises you had?
No, I think it's just the mentoring of people that you or I see as potential CHROs, giving them experiences. I know with my leaders at West, what I do try to do is give them exposure to the board. So if they're a functional leader in, let's say, diversity, I have that individual present to the board our diversity and inclusion strategy. I'm very lucky in that the board is very interested in HR. West is a company in transition, very much in transition, and there's been a lot of initiatives that we've been driving from an HR perspective to get it to be the company that we want it to be. It's a very good company, always has been a good company, but what we now need it to be a better company, one that is scalable, one that allows for the fluid movement of talent, one that has clear communications and connections to the workforce, especially now that we have 5 generations in the workplace, right? And I do. I have as young as 18 and as old as 80. Wow. So I have to, my team has to be able to navigate the needs of those different generations. And so to help prepare, it's really about mentoring, giving stretch assignments, giving exposure to the board, and coaching, developing.
And one of the things that you also mentioned that you talked about culture a little bit. And you talked about how that could be obviously a real strength for companies, but if you're trying to make big changes, it can also slow changes down a little. Can you say a little bit about what HR can do to really affect culture, and maybe what you need to be thinking about if you're trying to make changes within a strong culture?
Yeah. From a HR perspective, in terms of trying to redefine the culture, if you will, or refresh the culture, contemporize it, whatever you want to call it. Some of the things that we've been doing is, one, making sure we understand from a leadership team what is the culture that we want, right? So what is the culture that we're trying to create at West? And then it is about holding people, specifically leaders, accountable for driving that culture. So what's the culture you want? Communicating it over and over again in employee forums, in town hall meetings. We do coffees and we communicate about the culture. We also have engaged our employees on helping us define what that culture is. So we did some roundtable surveys about what is our mission, vision, and values. And then from an accountability perspective, making sure that leaders, employees are accountable to deliver on those expectations of behaviors. So one of the things that we've done is in our performance and goals, we have questions associated with how are you living the values? How are you delivering on the culture? Because it's the saying, if it's not important, you don't measure it. If it's important, you measure it, and that's what we're doing.
Once again, thank you very much for coming home, we'd say. We sincerely appreciate having you on campus and really look forward to seeing you much more frequently.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
You just listened to another CHRO Conversation. Today, Annette Favorite of West Pharmaceutical Services, Inc. shared her views regarding how HR can be the change agent in driving business success. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.